Hello and welcome back to the TelecomTV Summit on the Cloud Native Telco and our panel discussion on the evolution of network functions from VNF to CNF. Now, as the industry moves towards cloud native network functions, is there still a future for VM-based virtual network functions? Or will telcos continue to deploy a mix of VNFs and CNFs for the foreseeable future? Well, with the help of today's guests, we are going to find out. And joining me on the programme today are Neil McRae, Managing Director, Architecture and Technology Strategy and Chief Architect at BT. Miguel Carames, Executive Director, Cloud and Technology Planning, Global Network and Technology at Verizon Wireless. Ahmed Zaidi, Telco Cloud NFV 5G Core Architect for Orange. Heather Kirksey, VP Ecosystem and Community at LF Networking, and Ildiko Vancha, who's Senior Manager Community and Ecosystem for the Open Infrastructure Foundation. Hello everyone, good to see you all. Thanks so much for taking part in this, our fourth panel for this year's summit. Now, given that this summit is all about the cloud native telco, is there still a need to develop and implement new VM-based virtual network functions? Ildiko, let me come to you first.
I think it is an interesting question, and I think that it is the best to look at it from technology evolution perspective. And I wanted to bring up an example, the Kata Containers open source container runtime project, which is actually a fusion between virtual machines and containers. Like, it puts a container into a really lightweight virtual machine. And what is interesting about this solution is that it uses the best of the virtual machine world, which is the isolation that traditional containers don't really provide. And also you have the option to choose the kernel for that particular application that runs in that particular container. And when it comes to the behavior and performance part, it really behaves like an actual container. So it's not really different from how traditional container runtimes are working. So I think when we are looking at this space, I would not want to look at it from the perspective of virtual machines are yesterday's, last year's story, and we just forget about them. But really is like how we can evolve what we have and how we can bring those capabilities that the technology offers, like especially when it comes to telco environments, edge environments, they're kind of going hand in hand. So when it comes to isolation, enhanced security, that is really, really important in those environments. And when it comes to like being able to have different kernels on the same host, depending on what application you're running inside the containers, that can also be a really big advantage compared to, again, traditional container solutions.
Thanks very much, Ildiko. And as you say, we're seeing an evolution here. Ahmed, from your perspective, do operators still need to see new VM-based virtual network functions being developed?
At least what they can say regarding the VM-based VNF. So we're going at least from CNF, right? Because all the containerization from cloudification and so on, we need that each CNF instead of VNF. But I agree with that what we have said before is VM is still needed at least to isolate the traffic to have more secure. But also we have another way to isolate traffic and network function that we can have in our, let's say, cloud. I would say we need VM-based at least for some specific, let's say, virtual network function. But the way is, okay, we are going for all from the CNF to have all the flexibility that all, for example, Kubernetes that can provide us and so on. We need VM for security, but the goal, let's say, is to go from CNF because at least, as you know, everything is containerized, and we need also to have this flexibility from large scale also to be able to scale up and scale down quickly to be, to be blocked by all the stack that we can have in VNF.
Great, thanks, Ahmed. So yes, we're heading towards CNFs, but there's still a need for VNFs then. Neil, well, what about you? What are you seeing here?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of frame it like this. If you imagine the first scene of a Star Trek episode, and there's two guys wearing red jackets. One of them is SNMP, and the other one is VM-based solutions. I think they'll be part of the story, but at the end of the story, they don't survive. And I think if you look at what we need to do in telco, it's all about automation and efficiency. And I think these VM-based solutions, they've got us, they've taken us on a journey for sure. They've been valuable, but are they the future? It's hard to see that they're the future because we can't afford to run them. So look, if there's an application that a customer wants and is willing to pay for us to run that and operate it, then perhaps they hang around. But it's difficult for me to see them making it to part two of this Star Trek story, I'm afraid. I just don't see it and the current need for us to do automation and simplification.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And it's just a reminder that you should never wear a red shirt if you're appearing in Star Trek. You've got a very small part. But on a serious note, yeah, absolutely great points. Thanks very much. Heather, thoughts from you?
I was honestly kind of going to follow Neil and make a little bit of a quip, which is that, let's be honest, if there's a technology that exists, it's going to continue running in a telecom network. But, as much as it is hard for us to sometimes move from, what we know and what we've recently learned, we look to the future. And red shirts in TNG, for example, are what the officer class wears, not what the ensigns wear when they go to be blown up on the planet.
Heather, far too much Star Trek and not enough Star Wars on this particular panel, I'm feeling. But let's move on, because there's great points everyone's made there. Now, as we're seeing disaggregation ramp up more, we're seeing a number of vendors offer pre-integrated software that bundles together various individual network functions to provide telcos with what they're calling cloud-ready solutions. Now, are these cloud-ready solutions a long-term and viable approach, or are they more of a stopgap measure? Miguel, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think, when you look at the dynamics in the market, I think the vendors are trying to cater to all the different potential customers that they have, which each of them are in a different place in their own journey towards cloudification. We have a strong belief that we want as much of the common services to be pushed down to the platform offered by our telco cloud that we build, and then the applications take advantage of them rather than getting a vertically integrated solution from the vendors, right? So we are pushing in that direction. That's how we're building our 5G core. That's how we're building our virtualized RAN. We've seen a lot of progress. It was a journey. There was some resistance early on from the ecosystem, partially because there was a fear of loss of control, or maybe having to integrate with many other pieces in the solution. Now, no longer just network functions, but applications with the cloud layer and so on. But most of those seem gone. It looks like the vendors are embracing this new environment. And yeah, they'll still try to have an offering in which they bring their own cache layer, because some customers might be inclined to go that way. And as it was mentioned earlier, maybe they want to drop these applications on a VM, and it's faster time to market, or it's simplicity, or they just don't feel that the teams are ready for a full move to containers and VMs and running their own infrastructure just yet. But I'm happy to see that at the same time, nearly all the vendors embrace the other model too, right? Where the applications are to run agnostic of the platform, work with any flavor of platform that you have. And now we have vendors that only really support that model too, are more forward-looking, maybe smaller, so they have to make their bets early and double down on those. So we are seeing those too. Now, beyond that, the application and the cloud integration itself, some organic bundling is going to happen. It always did, and it'll continue. So if you look on the 5G core specifically, you will have some bundling benefits from like applications, similar applications, right? So control plane, you have some benefits if you have the same partner provide, for example, NRF, SCP, SLF, and so on, right? There's similar applications, similar functionality, even some of the feature work that will happen over the next few years.
Thanks very much, Miguel. Neil, what's your thoughts on these pre-integrated cloud-ready solutions? Are they more of a response from vendors to the sort of uncertainty and variability we're seeing in the market now?
Look, I think that's part of it. I mean, I agree with what a lot of Miguel says, but I actually don't see them. I see them as helpful in some ways to kind of, if you think about, you've got to get up and running. If you're working with one platform or one product set, it's easier to get up and running. And certainly, you know, we've taken both approaches where someone's completely pre-integrated and we've integrated ourselves. There's no question it's quicker to get up and running on something where someone's already done the hard work of integrating. And, you know, you're willing to get much more aggressive support requirements from someone who feels that they own the whole show. So I would see this as a kind of transition. It's a great way for service providers to get, you know, find their feet in this world, get up and running, and then start to bring in the best of breed components, you know, as and when. However, even a fully integrated stack, you know, they're not really all owned by one player. You know, if you buy something from one of the big vendors, it's got other vendors in it that are partners or part of their ecosystem, because not every single vendor does every single component of it. Then you've got the actual infrastructure itself, where, you know, you're going to have to think about, you know, what's the PCI architecture for it? What CPU am I using? What network silicon or network accelerators am I using? So even in the most ideal world, you're never going to get 100%, you know, all of it delivered by one supplier. So at some point in time, you're going to feel that multi-vendor set of challenges. But also, I think, as Miguel says, it's an absolute opportunity for you to work with new partners and interesting partners to bring some differentiation or to tackle issues that are unique to your sector or your area or your market where you're working. So, but ultimately, I think, you know, this is a maturity issue. As we get more mature, as we get more comfortable with the way this technology works, I think over time those solutions they'll still be available, but there'll be less people deploying them as a first mover. If I think about our own BT Network Cloud, actually none of these pre-existing solutions existed, because if they had done, we would have gone down that route. We integrated everything from about 9 different vendors, and the pain of that was pretty challenging. So I think we might have gone down a different path. I mean, we got there in the end, but it wasn't easy.
I bet it wasn't. Thanks, Neil. And I just say, this is a market that is maturing, in transition, so it's changing all the time. Now, before we go on, I think a little bit of clarity is required here, because the term CNF, we're still seeing it getting used for cloud native network functions, network functions, containerized network functions. What's the difference here? And also, you know, does it actually matter? Heather, you're closely involved in all of this, so you know, does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of explain, containers are a specific technology. Cloud native, when you use it that way, you mean certain architectural principles that include things like immutability of infrastructure, designing automation in from the beginning, a savvier approach to state management. You could have a cloud native function deployed in a VM. It's, you know, a little bit more work, but that's possible. Containers are a specific technology that have a lot of benefits, but cloud native design principles are a bit more technology agnostic, that is looking at architecture related to the business benefits of agility, scalability, reducing cost, and being able to move your application wherever it needs to go, whether it's incredibly close to the edge or much closer to the core data center. And so I think that that's the sort of philosophical difference. You know, in reality, a lot of what you do with containers and with, you know, Kubernetes is going to almost force you down using cloud native design, but the difference is cloud native design is really connecting that architecture to the business drivers, and containers happen to be a very, very useful technology to get there easily.
Great, thanks very much for that, Heather. So there is a difference. It does matter. Ildiko, there is a difference, as Heather has said. There's a philosophical difference, but there's similarities in how we're using this technology. What's your views?
So first of all, I fully agree with everything that Heather said. And when we are talking about why does this matter, I think that it is really important to mention that using cloud native and containers interchangeably without really understanding what each of those are, then we kind of end up with similar challenges than what we had with virtual machines. Is that if I put something into a container, that will automatically make my application cloud native. And even if Kubernetes helps with guiding the designers and developers to the right direction, if there is no desire from the very beginning to really implement the application itself and the workload itself in a cloud native way and architect it in a cloud native way and use those principles, then that's where that difference comes out, like how one really is describing you the fundamentals of what it means for an application to run on a cloud environment, whichever cloud that is, versus what happens if you put something into a container and then run it wherever you want to run it. You could run it on a bare metal machine. So just because it's a container, it doesn't have to run on top of a cloud platform. So I think it is really important to differentiate between the principles and the technology choice, because in reality, when you're using containers, it really is only a packaging choice at the end of the day. And if we disregard this difference, then we practically just setting ourselves up for very similar failures than what the industry went through before.
Thank you very much, Ildiko. Miguel, we've heard the views there from two of the leading open source based associations in the market, but what about you? What are you seeing an importance between the terminology that we're using here?
Yeah, so I actually love what Heather and Ildiko said, and feel kind of validation for our approach, because we had this very similar conversation. And again, I talk mostly about the 5G core because that's what drove a lot of this adoption of kind of new principles in our network that then has been applied for other technologies. But we had this very similar discussion early on when we were architecting what that core was going to look like, even what requirements were going to go into our RFP back in whenever that was 2018 and so on. And we settled on this, let's define what we want the outcome to be, right? What are the cloud native principles that we'll be asking all our partners to comply with, the ones that will not compromise on, and then what's the best technology choice to meet or realize those requirements or those guidelines, right? So we follow that approach, as Ildiko and Heather were saying, right? So these are the things that we want to accomplish, right? So we want applications that are decompose agnostic from the platform. We want applications that are built in with microservices that can scale separately. We want in-service upgrade support. We want M+K redundancy models and so on. And then that for us drove and steered for most of the applications the decision to work with the vendors to implement them using container technology. And even then, early in the journey, we settled for a few of the applications to start with VNFs, as we felt more comfortable with VNFs for those. And then defined a migration path for those to become CNFs as the technology matured, or as we got some comfort level that we could reach the same level of performance and security and reliability for those particular applications on CNFs. So it's I'm 100% on board with kind of how Ildiko and Heather were framing this. Like if you don't really know where you're going, any road will take you there, but it might not be the best, the shortest, or the most efficient.
Yeah, absolutely, Miguel. Yes, we've got to know which direction we're on this journey. Well, look, let's move on to look at where we're at on the journey then. What is the current state of play with fully cloud native CNFs in terms of their development and also their adoption? Now, we've got three leading telcos on our panel today, so I'm going to ask you this question and start with Neil. Neil, where do you see us in our journey towards fully cloud native CNFs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're, as I said earlier, we're still very, I think, early in the stages. There's a lot of organizations trying to port what they've got into a cloud native environment or even a container environment, and you know, the ability for them to be spun up, spun down, or update or killed and restarted, you know, you quickly find out who's really selling you a pet and who's really selling you cattle, as the old adage goes. What we want to get to is effectively a set of capabilities that aren't dependent on anything other than themselves to run and operate and work across the network. And I think we're still some way off there. I think there are some smaller companies, as Miguel said, that are further and more advanced on this journey because they've ultimately started from scratch. We work with a company called Anuta on orchestration. And there's no question for me that their platform is cloud native, whereas some of the things that we get from the more established vendors, you can kind of see where they've kind of hacked it or worked around the fact that they're either carrying loads of state or that they're not quite as observable and manageable as they should be in a cloud native environment. So, or they have specific hardware requirements. So I think we're at the early parts of this journey, but I think the great thing is that most, if not all, of the vendors realize that this is the kind of a definite end direction. There's some that are actually going even further, heading towards serverless, where we can really abstract the infrastructure away. I think that's probably got more work to do, but there are certain capabilities and functions where that I think that will be valuable in the telecoms network. So I think we're off to a great start. I think everyone's I see very, very few vendors trying to fight this or say it's not the direction to go in. But I think we've still got a lot of pets and we definitely a lot more cattle so that we can run our networks efficiently and we can take advantage of the reliability and the scalability that cloud native gives us.
Great, fascinating. Thanks for those insights, Neil. Miguel, what about you? What do you see as the current state of play today?
Yeah, so very similar to Neil, right? So I think the market and the ecosystem has come to realize that this is it. That's the way kind of the networks of today and of the future are going to be built. And then they're getting to maturity, getting to scale. Even things like embracing some of the functionality that now you have available to yourself, but that's a little bit different than the way we've run the networks in the past, right? And there is this kind of fear to trust the machine, if you could, right? Like you have these capabilities that come with Kubernetes that will be really good, and that it'll provide a lot of flexibility, even TCO benefits, like cost savings opportunities and so on, being more efficient. But it comes with the trust in, right, that some of that level of automation is not going to result in negatively impacting the service or getting the things to feel like you've lost control over the network, right, when something isn't going right. So I think that, like Neil was saying, it's like we are in the infancy of all this, right? Like, so we've gotten a lot of functionality now, a lot of capabilities. We and the entire ecosystem are going to be learning how to fully take advantage of that and how to make it meaningful to the end customer, right? Because at the end of the day, if this is all about playing with technology, then it doesn't really help the business or the customer. That's meaningless, right? So how do we use all these capabilities to make it relevant for the end customer and the business?
Great insights there. Thank you very much indeed. And Ahmed, what about you? Where do you see the current state of play today?
So I'm very, let's say, confident and to also agree with Miguel and Neil what they have said. So at least what you can see in all the CNF, what we have in the market is more stable. it will be also allow us as a communication service provider to be able to provide different use cases, different businesses to our customers, and to be also more flexible because the technology allow us to do it instead of if you can compare regarding legacy one. Legacy one it was more complicated, but now thanks to the all containerized cloudification, so we are able to be more agile, let's say, and to be able to accelerate out time to market.
Great, thanks very much for that, Ahmed. And as all three of you said, it does appear that we're off to a good start, but we've still got quite a way to go on this evolution. Well, we've got time for one more question. So I'd like to ask, with all the work that's involved with cloud native, and there is a lot of work, can a true cloud native architecture be a viable approach for the majority of CSPs, especially the tier 2s and tier 3 telcos? Or will it just be adopted by the largest ones, the tier 1s? Neil, if we look at the industry as a whole, is this a route forward for the whole industry?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I mean, I think at the core, let's be real right now. Telco's in a tough part of its life cycle. We're investing big on fiber, we're investing big on 5G, and we've got to make really great returns on that if we're going to start thinking about 6G and some of the other capabilities we need. And I think, we have a strategy that I wrote at BT called Ambition 2030, and the first line of that strategy says, run telco as efficiently as possible. And I think this type of software and solution that we've been gifted by the hyperscalers and the cloud guys is really helpful in that journey. So I think to stay competitive, to be a differentiator, if you're a tier 2 or a tier 3 challenger, you're going to have to figure this out. Perhaps you partner with the public cloud, and leverage something like EKS from Amazon or Anthos from Google. There's some paths that you can take to make this simpler, but ultimately I think we all end up in that direction. And there's the efficiency part of that, which we absolutely have to deliver upon, but also there's a network as a service part where increasingly we're going to be talking to each other and creating, connectivity on demand or capabilities on demand by using APIs and function calls. And if you don't have the right backend that's scalable, extensible, reliable, then you're not going to be part of that opportunity. And I think that requires all telcos, eventually to head in this direction. And ultimately, I think in time, trying to buy something that isn't in this shape will become increasingly harder. However, to build on one aspect of the previous question and this question, I do think there are some things in the cloud native architecture that we as telcos can actually add some value. So today, there is no organization on the planet that does availability better than telcos. And I think we've got a lot to input into that part of how the cloud native and the cloud architecture moves forward. There's techniques and capabilities that we are experts on that we can bring to that party. And the second one is security. I think, we are used to running highly secure platforms for government, for hospitals, healthcare, and I think there's some aspects of that as a use case that again, I believe we need to bring into the whole cloud native architecture to add and build upon what is a fantastic foundation, but will allow us to leverage this technology more and actually help the hyperscalers get to the sort of reliability that we have in telco, which I'm sure they'd love to have. So, there's a bit of a journey here, but 10 years from now, if we look back, I see this being, a massive step in our direction, and then who knows what new computer science direction takes us there. We've got quantum, we've got other architecture, serverless and function based. So who knows what happens at that point? But I definitely think we'll be in this cloud native world in a big way across the entire industry.
Yeah, thanks very much, Neil. And telcos certainly want to be active on this journey and not just passive. So brings me to Ildiko. When you look at the communities, the developer communities, what do you see? Do you see as cloud native as being applicable and viable for all telcos, the tier 1s and tier 2s? And also, as Neil said, can telcos feed back in, and should they feed back in more of their expertise?
I would say yes, then yes. So in a bit more detail, like when we say cloud native, again, the design and architectural principles. So what the cloud native term itself means is that whenever an operator is running any cloud platform in anywhere in the infrastructure, whatever application is running on top, that needs to be designed and developed with the mindset of that it is running on top of a cloud platform. So when it comes to the principles themselves, they should help every operator and tier 1, tier 2s, tier 3s. So that should not really be a big difference. At the same time, when it comes to moving between technologies like virtual machines and containers, working together in open source environments, in my experience, usually helps everyone to be able to move faster with their journey and have that TCO and ROI numbers be more ideal. And on one last angle to mention, when it comes to open source, there is a lot of development going on in the infrastructure space. So when we are talking about cloud native, it's actually not really just the application layer that has to be evolved and really embracing what cloud native itself means. But it's also the cloud itself, the infrastructure solutions that also need to evolve. So for instance, for example, we have a project called Starling X. It is an open source cloud platform. It is fine-tuned for edge use cases. However, it is used by large telecom operators, Verizon, Vodafone, T-Systems, KDDI, and more. And what's interesting about that platform is that on one hand, it creates a fusion between Kubernetes and OpenStack and treats both virtual machines, containers, bare metal workloads as first-class citizens. And at the same time, what the platform does is it provides a lot of additional components that makes it easier to orchestrate and manage the infrastructure, making it more secure, and really just doubling down on automation, which I believe is the key word for the success of cloud native. And when it comes to the open source space, open source really works the best, and it really only works if the companies, organizations, individuals participate. Come with feedback, how the software works, report a bug, fix it, fix documentation, talk to each other, learn from each other. That is really what is the big advantage of open source, and not just the source code being available online.
Great, thanks very much, Ildiko. And Heather, from the LFN's perspective, do you see cloud native and the move to CNFs being a viable strategy and approach for all telcos, regardless of their size?
If you look at the business drivers behind cloud native, I think that they're even more key to the tier 2s and tier 3s because they've got a lower size and more less headroom in their margins, right? So reducing costs, being resilient, being scalable out of the box, I think is very valuable to them. And then talking about the sort of contribution to open source, they may not be large enough organizations to, provide a ton of code or a ton of resources, but we still want to hear from them. This goes to what Ildiko is talking about. We like hearing from everyone and, bring to the table what you need to see on the menu. Because, there's a large community that's trying, doing their best and generally succeeding at listening and architecting and taking it in. And, the larger the community that we hear from, the larger the community that we serve. There's nothing like open source. There's also nothing like telecom. We connect people, we connect the world, and open source to me sometimes feels like, global communications embodied in people making that communication infrastructure better.
Great. Thank you very much, Heather. Well, look, we've got to leave it there for now. But before we go, I just want to go back to Neil's analogy about Star Trek earlier, because I've realized I'm the only one of you who's wearing a red shirt today. So that probably was a big mistake on my part. Thanks very much for taking part in our discussion, and hopefully I'll see you again in the future. Thanks very much. Now, if you are watching this on day 2 of our Cloud Native Telco Summit, then please send us your questions and we'll answer them in our live Q&A show, which follows immediately after this program. And if you missed any of our panel discussions and keynote interviews in this year's summit, don't worry, they will all be available to view on demand from tomorrow. For now though, thanks for watching and goodbye.